Captain Eli Stroud sat in the cockpit of the Aegis, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. His mission was simple: explore the far reaches of the galaxy and document any findings. It was just another day of routine, but Eli couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The planet in front of him was uncharted, a small world on the edge of known space. The surface was covered with dense forests and towering mountain ranges. The scan showed signs of life, but nothing too advanced. Just primitive settlements scattered across the planet. Eli felt a little thrill. This could be the discovery that would make his mission worthwhile. "Captain Stroud, we're entering the planet's atmosphere," his communications officer, Lieutenant Miranda Lee, called from behind him. "Understood, Lieutenant. Begin the descent," Eli responded, focusing on the controls. As the Aegis broke through the thick clouds, the lush green landscape below came into view. The ship touched down gently in a clearing near a small village. Eli grabbed his equipment, checked his sidearm, and made sure the communication devices were set to work with the planet's frequencies. He wasn't expecting trouble, but it always paid to be prepared. "I'll be back in a few hours, Miranda." "Keep the engines warm just in case," Eli said, giving his officer a nod before stepping out of the ship. The air was thick with the scent of earth and nature, something Eli hadn't experienced in years. He took a deep breath and began walking toward the village. It looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. The buildings were made of simple stone and wood, with small gardens filled with flowers and crops. There were no signs of advanced technology, but Eli couldn't help but feel a sense of curiosity. As he approached the village square, Eli noticed something unusual. A figure stood in the middle of the path, watching him. At first, he thought it was a local, one of the planet's inhabitants, but then he saw her face. The woman was unlike anyone he had ever seen. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, her hair long and silver, flowing like water. Her eyes, glowing faintly, locked onto his, and a slow smile spread across her face. "I know you, human," she said in perfect English, her voice soft but clear. Eli stopped in his tracks, his heart skipping a beat. The woman's voice had an almost otherworldly quality, but it was undeniably familiar. He stared at her, confused and speechless. "I beg your pardon," Eli managed, still trying to understand what was happening. "I know you," the woman repeated, her smile widening. "You've come at last, Captain Eli Stroud. The prophecy spoke of you, the human who will save us." Eli's mind raced. The prophecy. Save them. He had no idea what she was talking about, but something about the way she said it made him feel as though he were standing on the edge of something monumental, something that would change everything. "Who are you?" Eli asked, trying to steady his breath. The woman's smile softened, and she stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "I am Relara. And you, Captain Stroud, are the one we've been waiting for." Eli stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to say. The woman, Relara, was still smiling at him, her glowing eyes filled with a calm intensity that unnerved him. The words she had spoken echoed in his mind. "The prophecy spoke of you." Eli was no stranger to alien cultures. He had traveled through space for years, studying distant worlds and meeting countless species, but none of them had ever spoken of a prophecy, especially not about him. "I think there's been some mistake," Eli said, his voice steady, though he couldn't hide his confusion. "I'm just a captain on a simple exploration mission. I don't know anything about prophecies or saving anyone." Relara's smile faded, replaced by a look of deep understanding. She took a step closer, her movements slow and graceful. "You are the one, Captain Stroud," she said softly. "The prophecy isn't about what you are. It's about what you can become. We've waited for a human like you for centuries." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "I'm just a soldier. I don't have any special abilities or—" "Not abilities," Relara interrupted. "Courage, intelligence, determination. Those are the traits that made your people special. The prophecy was written long ago, when the Ancient Ones foresaw a time when our world would need help. They knew that only a human could lead us to victory. Raylara paused, letting her words sink in. Our world is under the control of the Zorak, a ruthless alien race that has enslaved my people for generations. The prophecy said that a human would come, someone who could unite us and lead us to freedom. Eli's mind was spinning. Zorak. He had never heard of them before, but the look in Raylara's eyes told him she was serious. This wasn't some wild story. She believed it. I still don't understand, Eli said, rubbing his temples. Why me? Why a human? Raylara's gaze softened, and she stepped back, glancing around at the village they stood in. Humans have a unique quality, she said, her voice filled with reverence. Your species has an unbreakable spirit. You fight against all odds, no matter how difficult the situation. That is why the prophecy was written. The Ancient Ones knew that no other race would have the strength to stand against the Zorak. Eli was quiet for a moment, thinking about her words. He had seen humanity's resilience firsthand. He had fought in battles where victory seemed impossible, and yet, against all odds, humans always found a way to survive. But leading a rebellion against an entire alien race, it seemed insane. I'm just one man, Eli said, shaking his head. How can I lead a whole planet to freedom? Raylara's eyes met his again, and this time, there was no doubt in them. Because, Captain Stroud, the future of our world depends on you. You are the one who can change everything. Eli didn't know what to say. The weight of her words settled on his shoulders like a heavy burden. His mission had just become a lot more complicated. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was being asked of him. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to walk away. Not now. All right, he said, his voice low but firm. What do we need to do? Raylara's smile returned, brighter than before. We begin with the rebels. We need to find them. Eli followed Raylara through the winding paths of the village, his mind racing. He still couldn't fully grasp what was happening. 1 minute, he was on a routine exploration mission. And the next, he was standing in front of an alien woman who claimed that an entire planet's future rested in his hands. Raylara led him to a large stone building near the center of the village. Inside, the walls were lined with ancient texts and glowing symbols. The air smelled of old paper and dust, but Eli couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing in a place that held the secrets of a forgotten world. This is our library, Raylara said, her voice echoing softly in the room. It contains the history of our people, the knowledge of what has been lost, and the story of the Zorak. Eli nodded, scanning the shelves filled with old scrolls and tablets. He had read about ancient civilizations before, but this was different. These people had lived through decades of oppression, yet they had managed to preserve their history and culture. I'll show you something, Raylara said, pulling a scroll from a shelf. She carefully unrolled it on a nearby table. The symbols on the scroll glowed faintly, shifting as though they were alive. Eli leaned in to get a closer look. What is this? It's the record of the Zorak's invasion, Raylara explained. Over 100 years ago, they arrived on our planet. At first, we thought they were peaceful, but their true intentions soon became clear. They are conquerors, not diplomats. She pointed to a section of the scroll where a dark figure stood over a broken planet. The figure was unmistakably alien, with sharp features and glowing red eyes. The Zorak are an advanced species, Raylara continued, her voice cold. They have technology far beyond anything we've ever seen. When they first arrived, they promised peace. But it was a lie. They enslaved our people, took our resources, and destroyed our cities. Now we live under their rule, forced to work in their mines and factories, with no hope of freedom. Eli felt a wave of anger rise within him. He had seen injustice before, but the scale of what Raylara described was unimaginable. The Zorak had wiped out entire civilizations before, and it seemed they had no intention of stopping. and no one has stood up to them. Eli asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. We've tried, Rylara said softly. For years, we fought back. But their power is too great. Their weapons, their ships, they're unstoppable. Our people are tired, Captain Stroud. We need help. We need you. Eli looked at the map on the wall, showing the Zorak's control over the planet. The entire world was under their grip, each region marked with the red symbol of the Zorak. The rebels had been fighting for years, but they were outmatched, outnumbered. You don't have to tell me, Eli said, his voice steady. I can see what they've done. But we'll need more than just a small group of rebels. We'll need an army. Rylara's eyes met his, filled with determination. That's why we need you, Captain. You are the leader we've been waiting for. Eli took a deep breath. He didn't know how, but he knew one thing for sure. This fight wasn't over. And he was going to make sure it never would be. The air outside was thick with tension as Eli followed Rylara through narrow streets toward the rebel base. The news about the Zorak's brutal control over the planet weighed heavily on his mind. He had always fought for a cause, but this was different. This was a fight for freedom, not just for one world, but for an entire species. Rylara walked beside him, her eyes fixed ahead, her expression determined. She had spoken of the rebels, the group that had been fighting for years to free their world from the Zorak's grasp. Eli's curiosity grew. Who were these rebels? How had they survived for so long under the Zorak's iron fist? As they reached the edge of the village, a hidden path led them into the forest. After walking for about an hour, they arrived at a large cave concealed by thick foliage. This was the rebel base, and Eli immediately noticed the difference in the air. The rebels were serious, disciplined. There was no room for doubt here. This was a place where survival mattered more than anything else. Rylara led him through the cave entrance, where a group of soldiers stood at attention. They all stopped what they were doing and turned to look at him. Eli couldn't help but feel the weight of their stares. They were sizing him up, and he knew it. These were the people he would need to work with if he was going to help them succeed. Captain Stroud, a gruff voice called from the back of the cave. A tall, muscular man with short, dark hair stepped forward. His expression was serious, but there was a hint of curiosity in his eyes as he looked Eli up and down. This was General Sealer, the leader of the rebels. You're the human they've been waiting for? Sealer asked, his tone skeptical. Eli nodded, trying not to show his discomfort. I'm here to help, he said, his voice firm. I don't know how yet, but I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes. Sealer raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything at first. He seemed to study Eli for a moment, before finally breaking into a small, approving grin. You're brave, Captain, he said. But we don't need bravery alone. We need skill, and we need someone who knows how to lead. I've led before, Eli replied, standing taller. I've commanded troops in battles, organized defenses. If you've got the resources, I can help train your people. Together, we can fight the Zorak. The general nodded slowly. You may be the human the prophecy spoke of, but you'll need to prove it to my people. They've seen failure too many times. We've tried before, Captain, and every time, we were beaten back. Rylara stepped forward, her voice soft, but full of conviction. Sealer, they are not the same as the others. Eli is different. The general didn't respond immediately, but he stepped aside, motioning for Eli to follow him. The rebels' base was a mix of makeshift barracks and training areas. Eli could see the scars of years of battle, broken weapons, damaged equipment, and tired, determined faces. We need to change our strategy, Eli said, walking alongside Sealer. We're not going to win by fighting them head-on. We'll have to use guerrilla tactics, hit them where it hurts, and be ready to retreat when necessary. Sealer listened closely. His eyes narrowed in thought. You know warfare. I can see that. We've never had much success with guerrilla tactics, but I'll listen. If you can bring us hope, Captain, Then I'll follow your lead. Eli nodded. He could feel the weight of the responsibility settling on him again. The rebels were desperate, and they needed a leader. He didn't know if he was the right one, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to back down. We'll start with what we have, Eli said. It may not be much, but we'll make it work. Together. The next few days were a blur of strategy meetings, training exercises, and long hours spent planning. Eli was quickly learning that the Zorak's control over the planet was far deeper and more complicated than he had initially thought. The rebels were brave, but they lacked the resources and organization to truly challenge the Zorak. Eli knew they needed a game changer, something to tip the scales in their favor. It was early in the morning when Raylura came to him with a somber expression. "Captain," she said, her voice low. "There is something I need to show you, something you won't believe." Eli looked up from the map he had been studying. "What is it?" She motioned for him to follow her. They left the rebel base and made their way into the forest, walking in silence. After a short while, they reached a hidden cave deep in the woods. Eli could see that it was well guarded. 2 rebels stood at the entrance, nodding at Raylura as she passed. Inside the cave was a large chamber, its walls covered in strange symbols and alien technology. At the center of the room, there was a massive machine, unlike anything Eli had ever seen. It hummed with energy, and its surface seemed to shift and change, as though alive. "This is what we've been hiding," Raylura said, her voice reverberating through the chamber. The machine was created by the Zorak. They built it long ago, during their first attempts to conquer the galaxy. Eli stepped forward, drawn to the machine. "What is it?" Raylura hesitated before answering. "This machine has the power to manipulate time and space. The Zorak used it to travel across different dimensions, to manipulate events and control the flow of history." Eli's brow furrowed. "You're saying they can change time. But why would they need something like this?" Raylura took a deep breath. The Zorak are not just conquerors of worlds. They are masters of manipulation. They realized that to fully control the galaxy, they would need to control time itself. But something went wrong. Eli looked at her, confusion growing in his mind. What went wrong? Raylura motioned to the machine. The Zorak's experiments created a rift in the timeline, a fracture that they couldn't close. "That's where you come in, Captain Stroud." Eli felt a chill run down his spine. "Me? How could I possibly be connected to this?" Raylura's gaze was intense. "The rift they created led to your arrival here. You weren't just brought here by chance, Eli. The prophecy was not only about a human leader. It was about you being the key to fixing what the Zorak broke." Eli stared at the machine, trying to process what she had said. "So I'm here because the Zorak messed with time." Raylura nodded. "Exactly. And now you have the power to set things right. You can fix the rift, and in doing so, you'll be able to undo the damage the Zorak have caused. But it won't be easy. The Zorak will do everything in their power to stop you." Eli felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. He had always known there was something special about this mission, but he had never imagined this. He wasn't just fighting for a world. He was fighting for the very fabric of time itself. "I don't know how I can fix this," Eli said, his voice filled with uncertainty. "But I won't let the Zorak destroy everything. I'll do whatever it takes." Raylura smiled, her eyes filled with hope. "That's why we're counting on you, Captain." The weight of Raylura's words hung over Eli as they left the cave. The machine, its hum still echoing in his mind, seemed to symbolize everything that was at stake. Fixing the rift in time wasn't just a mission now. It was the key to their future. But Eli knew that with this new responsibility came danger. The Zorak were not going to let anyone meddle with their timeline. They would stop at nothing to protect their hold on the galaxy. "We need to move quickly," Raylura said, breaking the silence as they made their way back to the rebel base. "The Zorak know that we have the machine. They'll be coming for it soon." Eli nodded. "How much time do we have?" Raylura glanced over her shoulder, her expression tense. We don't know for sure, but it won't be long. We need to reach the heart of Zerek-controlled territory before they do. The rebels had been working tirelessly to plan a strike on the Zerak's main base, hidden deep in the mountains. It was a place that no one had ever successfully infiltrated. The Zerak's defenses were impenetrable, and their soldiers were merciless. But Eli had a plan, one that involved using the rebels' guerrilla tactics to strike fast, hit hard, and disappear before the Zerak could retaliate. "This is our best chance," Eli said, gathering the rebels for one final briefing. "We won't defeat the Zerak in a head-to-head fight, but we can disrupt them. If we can get inside their base, we can destroy the heart of their operations and, more importantly, get to the machine." General Sealer, who had been listening intently, nodded. "We'll need a distraction, something that will pull their forces away from the base." Eli's eyes lit up with an idea. "We've got explosives. We'll plant them near their outer defenses, cause a diversion. While they're distracted, we'll slip in." Relara stepped forward. "And once inside, we'll need to activate the machine. But it won't be easy. The Zarak have sensors everywhere. They'll know we're there the moment we step inside." Eli looked around at the rebels, their faces a mix of determination and fear. These were people who had lived under the Zarak's rule for far too long, and now they were ready to fight. But they needed someone to lead them. Eli felt the weight of their trust on his shoulders. "We've trained for this," Eli said, his voice steady. "You know the plan. Stay sharp, and we'll get through this together." Once we reach the machine, we activate it, fix the rift, and bring down the Zarak's entire operation. Sealer nodded, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Let's show them what humans are made of." The rebels rallied, their energy shifting from uncertainty to resolve. Eli could feel it too, the surge of purpose that came from knowing the odds, but not backing down. This mission wasn't just about a planet. It was about fighting for something greater than themselves. It was about setting the galaxy on a new path. As the rebels prepared for their final assault, Eli stood by the edge of the camp, staring at the distant mountains. The Zarak's base lay hidden somewhere within, but he wasn't afraid. He was ready. He had no choice. The future of time itself depended on it. "Let's go," Eli muttered under his breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. The night had fallen, and the rebel camp was quiet, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves in the wind and the soft whispers of soldiers preparing for the mission. Eli stood by the edge of the camp, looking out toward the mountains that housed the Zarak's base. The path ahead was treacherous, filled with danger and uncertainty, but he had made his decision. There was no turning back now. He glanced around, seeing the rebels moving with focused determination, their faces set in grim resolve. They had been through so much already, years of oppression, constant fighting, and loss. But tonight, they would fight for something greater. They would fight for freedom. "We're ready," General Sealer said, walking up to Eli. His voice was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "We'll start at midnight, as planned." "The explosives are set." Eli nodded, his own heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. "Good," he said, his voice steady. "Once we cause the diversion, we'll move in. Stay close, stay quiet, and remember the plan." The rebel soldiers gathered in small groups, making their way through the dense forest. The Zarak's base lay ahead, hidden deep within the mountains. The path to it was narrow and well guarded, but the rebels had a secret advantage. They knew how to move without being seen. Eli led the way, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had led soldiers into battle before, but this was different. This wasn't just about winning a fight. This was about saving a world, and possibly even the future itself. The journey through the forest was long, but the rebels moved silently, like shadows. When they reached the outskirts of the Zarak base, Eli signaled for everyone to stop. The base was heavily guarded, with patrols moving in and out of the perimeter. The rebels crouched low, waiting for the signal. "We're in position," Siller whispered, his voice barely audible. Eli glanced at the timer in his hand. Now. The sound of explosions shattered the quiet of the night, echoing across the mountains. The Zorak's outer defenses erupted in flames, and the rebels immediately sprang into action. They moved swiftly, avoiding the chaos created by the blasts and slipping into the base's shadowed interior. Eli's heart raced as he led the group through a maze of corridors and stairways. They had to move fast. Every second counted. The longer they stayed inside, the greater the risk of being detected. But they couldn't stop now. They had come too far. Finally, they'd reached the central chamber, the heart of the Zorak's operations. The machine that controlled the rift was hidden behind a massive steel door, guarded by two heavily armed Zorak soldiers. Eli signaled for the rebels to stay back. He stepped forward, drawing his blaster, his grip steady. With a single motion, he incapacitated the guards, taking them down silently. They had no time to waste. The door to the chamber slid open, revealing the machine. It stood there, massive and foreboding, surrounded by complex control panels and glowing lights. The energy from the machine pulsed in the air, as if it was alive. Eli approached it slowly, his mind focused on the task ahead. Rylara's voice echoed in his mind. "You are the key to fixing the rift." He took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment that would change everything. He moved to the control panel, his hands shaking but determined. He had no idea how to operate the machine, but he couldn't afford to fail. "This is it," Eli whispered to himself. The hum of the machine grew louder, and Eli's fingers hovered over the controls. He was about to make history. Eli's heart hammered in his chest as he stood before the machine, the hum of its power filling the room. The glowing lights flickered, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing on him. The entire future of this world, and possibly time itself, was in his hands. The control panel in front of him was complex, filled with blinking lights and strange symbols. Eli stared at it for a moment, his mind racing. He had never seen technology like this before, but he had to trust his instincts. This was what he was here for. He had to fix the rift. "Eli," Rylara whispered, standing behind him, her voice tense. "We don't have much time. The Zorak will be here soon." Eli nodded, taking a deep breath. "I know. I'll make it work. Just give me a moment." He reached forward and began pressing buttons, his fingers moving quickly over the unfamiliar controls. Nothing seemed to happen at first, and doubt crept into his mind. What if I can't fix it? But then, the machine emitted a low hum, and the lights on the panel flickered. Eli's heart skipped a beat. I think it's working," he muttered, his voice filled with hope. Rylara stepped closer, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Hurry, Eli. If we don't fix the rift, the Zorak will be able to control everything. Time itself will be their weapon." Eli focused, trying to ignore the mounting pressure. He studied the machine, the symbols, and the patterns, trying to piece together the puzzle. The Zorak's technology was advanced, but it wasn't invincible. He had seen enough in his years of combat to understand that all machines had weaknesses. Suddenly, a sharp noise cut through the air. The sound of footsteps. Heavy boots. Eli's pulse quickened. The Zorak soldiers were closing in. They were getting closer. The diversion had worked, but not for long. "I need more time," Eli said urgently, his fingers flying over the controls. "I'll hold them off," Rylara said, her voice unwavering. "You finish what you started." Eli didn't have time to argue. He watched as Rylara stepped toward the door, ready to face whatever danger was coming. He could hear the sound of her blaster as she engaged the enemy. But his focus was on the machine. The lights on the panel blinked rapidly, and a low, resonant sound filled the room as the machine came to life. Eli's eyes widened. The rift in time was beginning to close, but it was unstable. He had to stabilize it before it collapsed completely. "Almost there," Eli muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. His hand shook, But he didn't stop. He pressed a sequence of buttons, hoping he had figured it out in time. Outside the chamber, the sound of gunfire echoed, followed by a loud crash. Relara was fighting off the Zorak, but it wouldn't be long before they overwhelmed her. Eli's mind raced as he struggled to stabilize the rift. The machine's energy surged, and the room seemed to tremble. Then, a burst of light, brighter than anything Eli had ever seen, shot out from the machine. The rift was closing. Time itself was beginning to realign. Eli watched in awe as the light filled the room, his breath catching in his throat. The machine powered down, and the room fell silent. Eli stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Had it worked? The control panel was dim, and the machine's hum had faded. Eli didn't know yet, but he felt something had changed. Something deep within the fabric of time had shifted. Relara burst into the room, breathless but alive. Eli, did it work? Eli looked at her, a sense of exhaustion and hope in his eyes. I think it did, but we won't know for sure until we get out of here. The sudden flash of light from the machine had faded, leaving behind a strange stillness. Eli stood frozen, staring at the now silent control panel. His breath was heavy, his pulse racing, but there was no way to tell if the rift had truly been fixed. The room felt both peaceful and tense, like the calm before a storm. We need to go, Relara said urgently, her voice cutting through the silence. Her blaster was still in her hand, ready for any enemy that might appear. Eli nodded, pushing the doubts from his mind. The Zorak were close. They had no time to waste. Let's move. The two of them turned and dashed toward the exit, moving quickly but cautiously. The sounds of battle still echoed from outside the chamber, the clash of weapons and shouting. It wasn't safe, but they couldn't afford to stay. Eli glanced back at the machine once more. Had they fixed the rift? Was it truly over? They reached the hallway just as a group of Zorak soldiers appeared, their cold eyes focused on Eli and Relara. Eli raised his blaster without hesitation, firing quickly, taking down 2 soldiers. But there were more, too many to fight head-on. Go, he shouted to Relara. I'll cover you. Relara didn't hesitate. She sprinted down the hallway, her footsteps echoing off the walls. Eli stayed behind, firing another shot to cover her escape, but he could feel the Zorak closing in. The sound of their boots grew louder. He turned and ran, following Relara. They'd reached a narrow passageway and ducked into it, hoping it would lead them out of the base unnoticed. The air was thick with tension, but they pushed on, knowing their lives depended on it. As they ran, Eli's mind kept racing. He kept thinking about the machine, about the rift. What if they hadn't closed it properly? What if the Zorak were already using it for something worse? The questions gnawed at him, but there was no time to answer them now. They turned a corner, and suddenly, Eli felt the ground shake beneath him. An explosion, powerful and close. He looked back and saw a massive fireball erupting from the heart of the Zorak base. The distraction from earlier, the one they had set up, had worked. The outer defenses had been taken out, but now it seemed the entire base was collapsing. Move faster, Eli shouted, urging Relara forward. They raced through the passage, and soon they saw the exit ahead. But as they neared it, a familiar voice echoed through the corridor. Captain Stroud. Eli stopped in his tracks, his heart dropping. The voice was cold and menacing. It was General Korak, the leader of the Zorak forces. He appeared at the end of the hallway, flanked by several soldiers, his eyes fixed on Eli with deadly intent. You think you've won. Korak sneered. The rift isn't closed. It can never be closed. We will reshape time itself, and you will be nothing but a footnote in history. Eli's grip on his blaster tightened. You're wrong, Korak. The rift ends today. Relara stepped forward, ready for a fight. We won't let you use it for your twisted plans. Korak laughed darkly. You're too late. Eli didn't wait for him to finish. He fired, the blaster shot hitting the wall next to Korak, sending the Zorak general ducking for cover. "Run!" Eli yelled at Rilara. They didn't look back. They sprinted for the exit, the sound of Korak's soldiers chasing them growing louder. But Eli felt something shift inside him. The rift might not have been fully closed yet, but it was working. Time was changing, and the Zorak's grip on the galaxy was weakening. With the exit in sight, Eli could feel the weight of their fight beginning to shift. They might not have won yet, but they were getting closer. Eli and Rilara sprinted through the darkened corridor, the sound of Zorak's soldiers close behind them. The exit was just ahead, but they knew they wouldn't make it without a fight. The explosion had caused chaos in the base, but the Zorak were not going down without a fight. Korak's voice echoed in the distance, full of fury and arrogance. "You cannot escape," Korak shouted. "The rift will be ours." Eli's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't stop running. He had to get out of the base, and he had to make sure the machine was truly deactivated. If not, the Zorak would use it to rewrite history itself. There was no time to waste. Rilara was beside him, her eyes sharp and focused. "We're almost there," she said, her voice tight. "We can't let them catch us." They rounded the final corner, and the exit came into view, a large metal door leading outside. But before they could reach it, the path ahead was blocked by Zorak soldiers, their weapons aimed at them. Eli skidded to a halt, his blaster ready in his hand. "We don't have time for this," he muttered. He turned to Rilara, his voice steady. "We fight our way through." Rilara nodded, her expression fierce. "We've come this far. We won't stop now." Without another word, Eli raised his blaster and fired, taking down 2 soldiers in quick succession. Rilara followed his lead, her shots precise and deadly. The Zorak soldiers returned fire, but Eli and Rilara were faster. They dodged, moving as one, covering each other's backs. Every shot counted, and neither of them missed. The battle was intense, but Eli could feel the tide turning. The Zorak soldiers were outnumbered, and their morale was low. They had underestimated the rebels. They had underestimated humanity. "We're almost there," Rilara shouted, as she took down another soldier with a well-placed shot. Eli nodded, his eyes locked on the exit. He could almost taste freedom. But as they moved forward, Korak's voice rang out one last time. "You think you've won, Stroud?" Korak sneered, stepping out from the shadows, his armor gleaming. "The rift will remain open. You cannot stop what's already begun." Eli stopped, his blaster aimed directly at Korak. "You're wrong," he said, his voice unwavering. "It's over." The two stared at each other for a long moment, the tension thick in the air. Korak raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Eli shot first. The blast hit Korak's shoulder, sending him sprawling to the ground. Rilara didn't hesitate. She fired at the remaining Zorak soldiers, ensuring they couldn't regroup. With the way now clear, Eli and Rilara made their final dash for the exit. They burst through the doors, into the cold night air, where the rest of the rebel force was waiting for them. Behind them, the Zorak base crumbled, the echoes of the battle fading into the distance. The rift had been sealed, the Zorak's hold on the galaxy shattered. As they stood there, catching their breath, Eli felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. They had done it. The rift was fixed, and the Zorak were defeated. For the first time in a long while, he felt the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. Rilara looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "We did it." Eli nodded, his heart filled with a quiet pride. "We did." And for the first time, Eli truly believed that humanity had a future free from the control of the Zorak. They had fought against the odds, and they had won. The battle wasn't just about saving the galaxy. It was about proving that no matter how dark the times may be, humanity would always find a way to rise.